The Vanished. I lived among the lost colony of Roanoke. I've spent my entire life haunted by one question. Where did they all go? 115 people, men, women, children, families who had crossed an ocean to build something new. People who had names and faces and voices I can still hear in the quiet moments, even now, even after all this time. People who were there, absolutely, undeniably, physically present, and then were not. Who vanished from the face of the earth so completely that 5 centuries of searching has not produced a single definitive answer about what became of them. I am 100 years old. I have outlived everyone I have ever known. I have watched generations come and go and carry their own mysteries with them into the ground. But this mystery, this one specific, impossible, infuriating mystery, has never left me. It arrived in my life when I was young enough that it shaped the person I became, and it has been with me every day since, and I am going to take it to my grave, still not knowing the answer. My name is Elias Whitmore, and the story I am about to tell you is the story of the lost colony of Roanoke, the first English attempt to settle permanently in the New World and the most complete disappearance in American history. I was there, or as close to there as anyone alive today can claim to be, descended from the people who were there, raised on the accounts of what happened, shaped by documents and testimony, and the living oral memory of what that island and those people meant to the family that bore it forward into the future. Tonight I am giving you everything I have, every detail, every theory, every unanswered question that has kept me awake for 100 years. And at the end, I am going to leave you exactly where history leaves all of us, standing in front of a word carved into a post, wondering, let me take you back to England, 1587. Not the England of comfortable modern imagination, not a place of safety and plenty and reliable futures. An England of social anxiety and religious tension and economic uncertainty, where the gap between the powerful and the powerless was a chasm that most people were born into and died without crossing. An England where opportunity for an ordinary man or woman was a theoretical concept more than a lived reality. And then the New World. The reports that had been coming back from the American continent for decades painted a picture of possibilities so vivid and so intoxicating that it could make a person willing to cross 3,000 miles of open ocean in a wooden ship to get at it. Fertile land essentially free for the taking, climate mild enough for good harvests, a new beginning unencumbered by the accumulated debts and limitations of the life left behind. Sir Walter Raleigh had been granted a charter by Queen Elizabeth to establish an English colony in the territory called Virginia. He had sent explorers. He had sent a preliminary expedition in 1585 that had spent a year on Roanoke Island off the coast of what is now North Carolina before returning to England with mixed reports. He had sent another group in 1587, this time with families, real settlers, people who intended to stay, to plant and build and make a permanent home. 117 people boarded ships in London in the spring of 1587. Governor John White led them. His daughter, Eleanor, was among the settlers, married to a man named Ananias Dare, and she was pregnant when they boarded. They were going to build something. They were going to make history. They had no idea what kind of history they would make. Roanoke Island sits in the outer banks of what is now North Carolina. A long, narrow barrier island separated from the mainland by a stretch of water called Pamlico Sound. It is not a large island. In 1587 it was covered in dense forest and fringed by marsh, cut through by streams bordered by the particular flatlight of the Carolina coast that makes the horizon seem impossibly wide. They arrived in July of 1587, and the first thing they found was the remnant of the previous expedition. A small fort had been built, and some structures. The previous settlers, men left behind to maintain England's presence, were gone. All of them. What remained were overgrown structures and, in one location, bones. Human bones, though not enough to account for all the men who had been left behind. This was the first warning. The first sign that Roanoke Island was not the uncomplicated fresh start that the promotional materials had suggested. But they were here. The ocean was behind them. England was 3 months away by ship. They had their supplies, their tools, their determination, and each other. They would make it work. They repaired the existing structures, they built new ones, they planted a garden, they established the routines of community, the division of labor that makes a settlement function, the social organization that emerges when people who need each other figure out how to live together. Church services on Sundays, the sound of hammering and sawing and children playing, the smell of wood smoke and cooking, and the particular clean salt smell of the island's perimeter. And on August 18th, 1587, Eleanor Dare gave birth to a baby girl, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. They baptized her in the small church they had built, and the ceremony was a moment of pure joy in the middle of everything that was uncertain and difficult. A child born here, on this soil, in this new world, meant that the colonists had not merely arrived. They had begun. I think about Virginia Dare often. She was 9 days old when her grandfather sailed away. Governor John White left in late August. He did not want to leave. The accounts make this clear. He argued against it, recognized the danger of leaving the colony without its leader and with uncertain supply lines. But the colony needed supplies. The ships that had brought them were returning to England and would not be back until spring, at the earliest, and someone needed to go and make certain that the supply ships came. Someone with authority and knowledge of the situation, someone who knew what was needed. White was the obvious choice. He was the governor. He had contacts in England. He had Raleigh's ear. He said goodbye to his daughter, to his 9-day-old granddaughter, to 114 other people who would be alone on a barrier island 3,000 miles from home until he returned. He promised to be back as soon as possible. He could not have known what was waiting for him in England, could not have known that the Spanish Armada was coming, that Queen Elizabeth would order all available ships to remain in English waters, that the emergency would last longer than anyone expected, that by the time he could get back to Roanoke, 3 years would have passed. 3 years. When he finally stepped ashore on Roanoke Island in August of 1590, he was prepared for many things. He was prepared for tragedy, for evidence that people had died of illness or starvation or violence, for the hard inventory of loss that 3 years of isolation in a new world might have produced. He was not prepared for what he actually found, which was nothing. Let me describe what White found precisely, because the details matter. The settlement was there, the structures were standing, not collapsed, not burned to the ground, not obviously destroyed. Some of the buildings had been dismantled carefully, the way you dismantle something, when you are moving it somewhere rather than abandoning it. The heavy equipment, the cannons, some of the heavier tools, had been removed and buried, which was also the behavior of people who intended to come back for their things rather than people who had fled in panic. The personal possessions were scattered. White found his own belongings, things he had left behind, including books and maps and items of some value, damaged by weather and time, but present. Chests had been buried, and some of those had been opened, and the contents damaged by moisture. But the goods were there. There were no bodies, not one. In a colony of 115 people, because 2 had died before White left, bringing the number to 115, not one body. No graves, no evidence of mass violence, no blood, no signs of the kind of catastrophic attack that would have left physical evidence on the ground. 115 people gone. And then White found the post. It was a tree or fence post at the entrance to the settlement, and carved into it in large clear letters a single word, Croatoan. He had arranged this with the colonists before he left. If they moved, they were to carve the name of their destination somewhere visible. If they had left under duress, if something had gone wrong, if the move was forced rather than chosen, they were to add a cross above the destination. There was no cross. Croatoan was the name of an island about 50 miles to the south. It was also the name of a people, a tribe, whose territory included that island and the surrounding mainland, a people with whom the colonists had developed a cautious but functioning relationship. The leader of the Croatoan, a man named Manteo, had travelled to England and served as an interpreter and guide. He was, as far as the colony had any allies in this new world, their most significant one. The message said we went to Croatoan. White understood this. He was relieved. He prepared to sail south to Croatoan Island and find his people and his daughter and his granddaughter. A storm came up. The ship's captain, assessing the weather and the risk, made the decision to return to England rather than fight the conditions to reach a small island 50 miles away. White argued he was not the captain. He could not override the decision. He went back to England. He spent the rest of his life trying to return. He never made it. The funding dried up and the priorities shifted, and the wars intervened, and the years accumulated, and John White died in Ireland sometime around 1593 without ever knowing what had become of the people he had left on Roanoke Island. He died not knowing. We still don't know, but let me tell you what it felt like from inside. Not from White's perspective. His perspective is the perspective of the man who came back and found nothing. Let me tell you about the time before, the months between White's departure and whatever happened, because something happened. Something that affected every single person in that settlement, all 115 of them, and left not a single body and not a single clear explanation, and only one word. The summer White left was fine, or fine enough. The colonists had their supplies from the ships. They had the structures they had built. They had the working relationships with the Croatoan people that gave them access to knowledge of the land and its resources that they desperately needed and could not otherwise acquire. But autumn came, and then winter. The food they had brought was rationing out. Farming in this new soil, with different growing seasons than England, produced results that were uncertain at best. The island's natural resources, fish, game, wild plants, supplemented what they had, but not generously enough. People began to go hungry in ways that were not immediately fatal, but that accumulated, that wore people down, that changed the quality of life in the settlement from difficult to genuinely dangerous. The relationships with the neighbouring peoples were complicated. The Croatoan were friendly, but the Roanoke, whose territory overlapped with the island, were not. They had reasons for hostility that predated the current colony. The previous English expedition had attacked a Roanoke village over a suspected theft, burning it, destroying the food stores. The current colonists had not committed that act, but they were English, and they were here. And the hostility was real and ongoing. There were incidents. Someone found missing tracks in the soft ground near the settlement's perimeter that were not English footprints. A sense growing slowly through the winter that the island was not as defensible as they had believed when they built their structures in the warm air of the previous July. People began to talk about moving. The original plan had always included the possibility of moving to the mainland, to the Chesapeake Bay area further north, with better agricultural land and a more defensible position. The plan had been interrupted by the late arrival of the fleet and the pressure to unload quickly and the political complications of the expedition's timing. But the plan had existed. The colonists knew about it. They had discussed it. At some point, we don't know exactly when, we don't know what precipitated the final decision, they decided to go. They packed what they could carry. They dismantled what could be moved and moved it. They buried the rest. They carved a word into a post and they went. Well, where exactly? That is the question that has never been fully answered. Let me take you through what we know and what we suspect and what remains purely speculation, because this story deserves more than a simple summary of theories. It deserves the full weight of what 5 centuries of investigation has produced. The most straightforward reading of the evidence is that the colonists went to Croatoan Island, as the carving said. This reading has a significant problem and a significant support. The support is the carving itself. They told White where they were going. The absence of the cross, the distress signal they had agreed on, suggests they left voluntarily and in reasonable order. The careful packing and dismantling of the settlement suggests planning rather than panic. The Croatoan connection was their strongest relationship in the region. It makes sense. The problem is that Croatoan Island, now Hatteras Island in North Carolina, was searched afterward, not by White, who never made it back, but by later expeditions. They did not find the colonists, or they did not find an obvious, intact English colony. What they found is less clear, and this is where it gets complicated, because the assumption that searching for the Roanoke colonists means looking for an intact English community is probably wrong. By the time anyone was seriously looking, years had passed. Years in which the colonists, if they had integrated with the Croatoan people, would have become something different. Not entirely English anymore, not entirely separate, something in between. There are accounts from English explorers in the early 1600s, men who travelled through the Carolina region and spoke with various indigenous peoples, of communities that seemed different. People with lighter skin and eyes than expected, people who reportedly spoke some English words, people who wore European-style clothing mixed with indigenous dress, children with features that suggested mixed European and indigenous ancestry. These accounts are fragmentary and some are clearly more reliable than others, but they exist and they point in a consistent direction. The colonists, or some of them, may have survived by becoming something other than colonists, by being absorbed into the Croatoan people, by marrying and having children, and learning new languages and new ways of living until the category of English colonist dissolved and something new emerged in its place. This is not a tragedy in the conventional sense. It is a transformation. And it may be the closest thing to an answer that the evidence supports, but it is not the only possibility. Some researchers have focused on the Chesapeake theory. The colonists had always planned to move to the Chesapeake Bay. Some or all of them may have headed north rather than south, toward the original intended destination rather than toward Croatoan Island. If this happened, they would have been moving into the territory of the Powhatan Confederacy, the powerful alliance of tribes whose territory covered much of what is now Virginia. And the Powhatan Confederacy, by the account of its own leader, Powhatan had massacred a group of people living at the edge of his territory at some point before the arrival of the Jamestown colony in 1607. Powhatan told the Jamestown settlers that this massacre had occurred. He told them he had ordered it because the people in question, apparently some combination of colonists and an indigenous group that had sheltered them, had been living under the protection of a tribe that was threatening his power. He claimed the massacre had been preemptive. He showed the Jamestown settlers copper implements and other items that appeared to be of English manufacture. This account, if accurate, provides the most specific and most brutal possible ending for at least some of the Roanoke colonists. killed by order of the most powerful indigenous leader in the region, their possessions distributed as evidence of the deed. If this is true, it means some of the colonists went north and died there. It does not necessarily mean all of them did. Some may have gone south to Croatoan, some may have gone north to Chesapeake, some may have gone elsewhere. 115 people do not necessarily make a single decision together, especially when the decision is made under pressure. And then there are the darker possibilities. Disease. The region was susceptible to drought in the late 1580s. Severe drought, documented by tree ring analysis, that would have affected food supplies and water sources and the general survivability of a community already stretched thin. Starvation. A community weakened by hunger and disease and the stress of isolation and conflict would have been vulnerable in ways that healthy, well-supplied people are not. If they died, if the colony simply failed, if disease or starvation or violence or some combination killed 115 people, where are the graves? Where is the physical evidence that leaves behind when people die? The absence of bodies, of grave markers, of any physical evidence of mass death is one of the most persistent features of the mystery. It is what makes the simple failure theory difficult to accept without qualification. People leave traces when they die. These people left almost none. Archaeological work has continued quietly and persistently for decades, and in recent years it has produced findings that shift the picture in interesting ways. A site called Site X in Bertie County, North Carolina, on the mainland across from Roanoke Island, has produced artifacts from the late 16th century that appear to be of English manufacture, objects that should not be there unless English people were there. The site has been carefully excavated, and the evidence is building that some English people were at this location during the period when the colony was present on Roanoke Island. This suggests a possibility that the other theories don't fully account for. Some of the colonists may have gone to the mainland, not north to Chesapeake, not south to Croatoan, but west across the Sound to the mainland of North Carolina, where they attempted to establish themselves in a new location. If this is true, it means the word Croatoan may have been a partial message, or a message that pointed in one direction, while some colonists went in another. It means the colony may have split, some to Croatoan Island, some to the mainland, and that the two groups had different fates. It means there may not be one answer to where the colonists went. There may be several answers, each covering a subset of 115 people, each with its own story that we cannot fully reconstruct. The archaeology is ongoing. The picture is still forming. There may be more to find. The DNA research is ongoing too. The Lumbee people of North Carolina, a large indigenous community numbering in the tens of thousands today, have long maintained a tradition that their ancestors included the Roanoke colonists. Surnames that appeared among the Lumbee in the 18th and 19th centuries, names like Dare, Sampson, Cooper, match names from the Roanoke colony roster. The Lumbee claim is not accepted by everyone. It has been disputed on various grounds over the years, and the full genetic history of the Lumbee people is complex enough that drawing a direct line to Roanoke is not simple, but the tradition exists, and it is a tradition that the Lumbee have maintained consistently, and it connects to the broader pattern of evidence suggesting that the colonists survived by integration rather than perishing by catastrophe. Virginia Dare, that 9-day-old baby, Eleanor's daughter, John White's granddaughter, the first English child born in the New World, may have grown up, may have survived, may have become something her grandfather would not have recognized, speaking a language he didn't know, living a life he couldn't have imagined, carrying in her physical being the merged heritage of two worlds that had collided on a barrier island in 1587. Or she may have died in infancy, as so many infants died in that time and that place, before the colony left Roanoke Island. We don't know. We don't know anything about Virginia Dare after the summer of 1587. She is the mystery within the mystery, the smallest and most helpless member of the lost colony, the one whose fate I have thought about most often over the years, the one whose story I most want to know and most will never know. Here is what I believe after 100 years of carrying this question, after a lifetime of reading everything written about it and visiting the site and standing on the ground where those structures stood and looking at the sound and the island and trying to feel my way towards something that the documents alone cannot provide. I believe they survived, not all of them. 115 people in those conditions over those years. Some of them would have died of disease or accident or the ordinary attrition of hard living in a difficult place. But I believe the core of them, or enough of them, survived. I believe they went to Croatoan Island, as the carving said. I believe some of them went elsewhere, to the mainland, perhaps to Chesapeake, perhaps to other locations we haven't identified yet. I believe the colony, under the pressure of 3 years without resupply, without news from England, without the support structure that was supposed to arrive and didn't, I believe the colony dissolved, not in a single catastrophic event, but over time, in stages, in the way that a community dissolves when the thing holding it together, the expectation of rescue, the identity of English settlers waiting to be recognized, loses its force. I believe people made individual choices and family choices and small group choices. I believe some of them joined the Croatoan people and stayed with them and became part of them. I believe some of them moved inland and found other communities and other accommodations. I believe a few may have died in ways that left no physical record. And I believe the answer is still out there, in the soil of North Carolina, in the DNA of people who don't know they carry it, in the oral histories of indigenous communities that have been only partially recorded and only partially heard, in the archives that haven't been fully searched and the archaeological sites that haven't been fully excavated. The answer exists somewhere. It is just not complete enough yet for anyone to hold it up and say, this is what happened. Croatoan, I come back to that word. I always come back to that word. Carved into a post at the entrance to an abandoned settlement, carved carefully, deliberately, by someone who knew that White was coming back and wanted him to know where they had gone. Carved not in desperation, but in decision. It is the only direct communication we have from the people who disappeared. One word, their final statement to the world they had left behind, to the governor who had promised to return and took 3 years to do it. They told us where to look. They did everything they could to leave a trail. They trusted that the trail would be followed, that the word would be found, that White would come and find them, and the story would continue. White found the word. He could not follow the trail. The storm came and the captain said no, and England was 3,000 miles away, and the years passed and the trail went cold. And 5 centuries later, we are still standing at that post, reading that word, trying to follow where it points. Croatoan, a direction, a name, a message carved by human hands in a moment we cannot fully reconstruct, by people whose subsequent story we cannot fully trace. The most important word in American history, maybe, the word that opens the oldest American mystery, the word that 115 people left behind as their only legacy, not knowing that their disappearance would be debated and investigated and mourned and wondered over for 500 years. They were real. Every single one of them was real. They had names: Eleanor Dare, Ananias Dare, Virginia Dare, Manteo, Roger Bailey, Joyce Archard, Thomas Coleman, and dozens of others recorded on the ship's roster. They had faces and voices and fears and hopes and the specific, ordinary, irreplaceable texture of individual human lives. They went somewhere. They became something. The world they entered absorbed them, and the record of that absorption has been fragmentary and partial and frustratingly incomplete, and the full story has not yet been found. My name is Elias Whitmore. I am 100 years old. I said at the beginning that I have been haunted by one question my entire life. Where did they all go? And at the end of everything, at the end of 100 years, and all the reading and all the research and all the standing on the ground where it happened, and all the nights lying awake, turning it over, I cannot answer it completely.
I can tell you they probably survived, most of them. I can tell you they probably went south to Croatoan Island and integrated with the people there and became something new, something that belonged to both worlds rather than either one alone. I can tell you the archaeology is pointing to the mainland, and the DNA research is pointing to the Lumbee, and the oral histories are pointing to a story of survival and transformation rather than catastrophe and death. I can tell you Virginia Dare may have grown up, but I cannot tell you with certainty. Nobody can. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What I can tell you is that those 115 people deserved better than the silence they received. They deserved Governor White coming back in 6 months, as promised, not 3 years. They deserved the supply ships that were supposed to come. They deserved the support of the enterprise that had sent them across an ocean with promises and then left them alone to figure it out.
They were abandoned. Whatever happened to them afterward, they were first abandoned. And the haunting quality of the mystery comes from that abandonment as much as from the disappearance itself. From the knowledge that they called for help and the help did not come, that they were patient and they waited and they finally made the only decision available to them. And we are still, 5 centuries later, trying to figure out what that decision was. They left a word, one word, and we have been following it ever since, Croatoan. If you ever stand on Roanoke Island, and you should if you can, stand at the edge of the Sound in the early morning, when the light is flat and grey and the water is still, and the air smells of salt and marsh. Listen to the quiet.
In that quiet, if you let it, you can almost feel them. The people who stood there before you, who built their houses and planted their gardens and baptized a baby and carved a word into a post and went into the world and did not come back. They are still here, in a sense, in the soil, in the DNA of people living today who don't know it, in the word on the post that has been reproduced and analyzed and debated for 500 years. They are the first Americans in the sense that matters most. Not the first people. The land was full of people long before they arrived, but the first people who tried to become something new in this new world, who were forced by necessity to stop being what they had been and become something else, who dissolved into the land and the people already here, and left behind only a mystery and a name. Croatoan, they were real.
And wherever they went, they carried with them the weight of being human in a hard world, the hope and the fear and the love and the loss that all human beings carry, that no disappearance and no mystery and no passage of time can take away from them. Remember them. Remember that word. Remember what it cost them to carve it. My name is Elias Whitmore. I am 100 years old, and I am still looking, still following the word wherever it leads, still hoping that somewhere in the next excavation, the next archive, the next genetic study, the next conversation with someone whose family has been carrying this story for generations without knowing it. Somewhere in all of that, the answer is waiting, Croatoan. I'll keep looking until I can't anymore.